1964. American streets are rumbling with V8s, thick with the smell of gasoline and burning rubber. Teenagers gather in supermarket parking lots, by diners, by old gas stations. By day, these cars take people to work, but at night, they turn into contenders in spontaneous street races, light to light, motel to motel. The country is living in an age of optimism. Less than 20 years have passed since the war. The economy is booming, salaries are rising, and gasoline costs almost nothing. A car isn't just transportation, it's part of your identity. If you don't have your own steel companion with a big engine under the hood, you feel like you're missing out on life. On the foundation of ordinary sedans and coupes, a whole new culture blossoms, hot rodding. Guys in garages pull heavy V8s out of old full-size cars and drop them into lightweight bodies. They cut, weld, repaint, raise compression, play with carburetors. Factory numbers stop meaning anything. What matters is simple: how far you pull away from the other guy when both of you stomp the pedal. Automakers see what's happening on the streets. Ford, Chevrolet, Chrysler keep releasing more powerful versions of their cars, but they do it carefully. General Motors, however, remains the strict one, a giant corporation that owns Chevrolet, Buick, Oldsmobile, Cadillac, and Pontiac. GM has a hard, unbreakable rule: no big engines in mid-size cars. Large displacement is allowed only for full-size, heavy, family, and luxury sedans. Supposedly safer, more respectable, and less likely to attract attention from regulators and insurance companies. Within this system, Pontiac looks almost like a retirement brand. The name is associated with comfort, chrome, and calm driving. The customers are older, family-oriented, not looking for trouble. For young people, there are other brands, and Pontiac is supposed to remain quiet and predictable. But inside the brand, the mood is completely different. Younger engineers and managers walk through parking lots, look at hot rods, listen to conversations at gas stations, and they realize Pontiac is losing an entire generation of buyers. They know they have great V8s sitting on the shelves. They know they can build something fast, but the GM rulebook ties their hands. In the mid-size segment, only modest engines are allowed, no monsters. And this is exactly the moment when a man appears, a man who decides not to attack the rules head-on, but to simply go around them. His name is John DeLorean. Tall, charismatic, walking with the confidence of someone who refuses to sit quietly. DeLorean started as an engineer, but rose quickly through the ranks. He understood engineering, marketing, and consumer psychology equally well. He saw how young people were going crazy for horsepower, how back alley races had turned into a nationwide pastime. And it frustrated him that Pontiac kept building cars for uncles while the market was screaming, "Give us something wild." He understood one thing clearly: if he walked into GM headquarters and said, "Let's drop a giant V8 into a mid-size coupe," they would politely dismiss him, or worse, tell him to never bring it up again. Rules were rules. But this is exactly where DeLorean's engineering cunning kicks in. He asks himself a simple question: what if we don't call it a new model at all? What if it's just an option? In his head, a scheme starts forming. Take a regular Pontiac Tempest, carefully squeeze a massive 389 V8 under the hood, give it stiffer suspension, a different transmission, a meaner exhaust, and package it all as a simple extra cost option. Not a separate car, just a checkbox on the order sheet. That's how the idea is born. The idea that the whole world will soon know as the Pontiac GTO. 1964. The concept of a charged Tempest is already fully formed in DeLorean's mind and in the minds of his team. On the table lie GM's rules, where it's written in black and white: a mid-size car cannot have an engine above a certain displacement. But those same documents contain one tiny loophole: the restrictions apply to models, not options. Pontiac engineers take a standard Tempest Le Mans and begin turning it into something the market has never seen before. They carefully wedge a huge 389 cubic inch V8 into the front subframe, install stiffer springs and shocks, a different rear axle, stronger brakes, a sportier steering wheel, a different gearbox. The result is a car that is no longer a family coupe, but a street predator. To bypass GM's rulebook, the whole setup is not registered as a new model. On paper, it's just an option package. In the price list, one new line appears: GTO Option Package. Technically, the Tempest remains the same. In reality, a monster has moved in under the hood. The team needs a name, and they take it from where no one expected: the world of Italian supercars. Ferrari 250 GTO was one of the most iconic machines of the early 60s. The letters GTO stood for Gran Turismo Omologato, Grand Touring homologated for racing. Pontiac boldly steals this badge for itself. No permission, no license, no blessing from Enzo Ferrari. Just 3 letters that sound short, sharp, and aggressive. And so Pontiac GTO is born, not as a standalone model, but as a secret weapon hidden in the options list. The first thing they do is give the car to journalists. Test drives in magazines of the era are filled with numbers that sounded insane for the time. 0 to 60 miles per hour in under 7 seconds, quarter mile in the low 14 seconds. For an ordinary road-going coupe in 1964, these were shocking figures, when most family cars barely reach 60 miles per hour in 12 to 13 seconds. In one publication, GTO is even compared to Ferrari. Of course, it's more of a marketing trick and a play on the name, but the effect is powerful. Young people look at dealership lots and see not just another Pontiac, but a car for those who aren't afraid. GM management is cautious at first. They approve a limited run, expecting to sell around 5,000 units for the year. Reality hits like a hammer. By the end of 1964, more than 32,000 GTOs are ordered. This isn't a success, it's a sensation. Buyers vote with their wallets and show GM what the market actually wants. 1965. Pontiac understands this is no longer an experiment. It's a real product, one that can reshape the brand's image. The GTO receives updates: a slightly revised exterior, new trim pieces, a more aggressive front end. But the main news is under the hood. A new version of the 389 appears, the tri-power setup, with 3 carburetors and up to 360 horsepower by the generous American standards of the era. On the streets, even wilder examples appear. Owners play with exhausts, swap camshafts, raise compression. The GTO becomes not just a fast car out of the showroom, it becomes the perfect platform for tuning. In diner parking lots, a seemingly ordinary blue or red GTO might be a beast that pulls ahead by 3 car lengths. Magazines keep stoking the fire. Pontiac's ads portray GTO as the car for those who stopped counting horsepower. Perfect for the youth. A bit scary for GM's conservative leaders, but nobody argues with sales numbers now. 1966. The first generation body is replaced by a new one. The styling becomes more expressive. The sides get that iconic Coke bottle shape, narrow in the middle, muscular at the arches. The front end with vertically stacked headlights makes the car recognizable instantly. In profile, the GTO looks like it's moving even when it's parked. It becomes that signature silhouette everyone later associates with the golden age of American coupes: long hood, short deck, powerful rear hips. Technically, the car stays true to itself, the same 389 V8, various power levels, manual or automatic, a wide list of options. Pontiac keeps pushing the emotional angle in ads. GTO is the car for someone who's tired of being like everyone else. Not a luxury sedan, a rebellion on wheels. 1966 became one of the most successful years for the model. The GTO finally secured its status as a symbol of a new culture, a culture where horsepower mattered more than chrome, and the sound of the exhaust said more about the owner than his suit ever could. 1967. On the outside, the GTO receives light updates, refreshed trim, new details adjusted for safety requirements and customer tastes. Versions with stronger brakes appear, including optional front disc brakes. But the most important thing is this: by now, the GTO doesn't need an introduction. If in 1964 the GTO was a risky experiment and a clever loophole workaround, then by 1967 it had become a full-fledged street hero. At a drive-in parking lot, one glance at that familiar silhouette, one listen to the big V8's loping idle, and everyone instantly knows who the main contender for tonight's races is. In just a few years, the GTO traveled the path from a hidden option for insiders to a true symbol of a new era. And these years, from 1964 to 1967, are considered the golden starting point of the entire muscle car movement. But why did it work? Why did this car become the symbol of a new era, and not some other machine with a big engine? First, Pontiac hit the cultural nerve of the moment. By the mid-60s, American youth was tired of the huge, soft, proper cars their parents drove. They didn't want rolling sofas with plush suspensions and whisper-quiet engines. They wanted something else, smaller, meaner, louder. And the GTO fit that demand perfectly. This wasn't a coupe for Sunday trips to church. This was a car that looked like it belonged at the starting line of a midnight drag race right out of the showroom. The 389 V8 didn't just impress on paper, it delivered emotion. The GTO didn't have refined European handling, magazines loved pointing that out, but nobody buying it cared. People wanted sensations. You hit the gas and the nose lifts slightly, the rear squats, the front unloads, and your whole body feels the torque rushing through the drive shaft. It's the kind of launch where passengers grab onto anything they can, and the driver smiles like he finally got what he'd been dreaming about. And the sound? That was a world of its own. A big, atmospheric V8 idling with a heavy thump, 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 as if lazily reminding everyone around, "I'm here. Don't test me." Crack open the throttle and everything changes. A growl, a rising wail, the harsh bark of the exhaust. And if the car had tri-power under the hood, those 3 carburetors opened in stages, and at high RPM, the GTO practically screamed, turning heads and shaking the confidence of anyone nearby who thought their engine was strong enough. In 1964-1965, it wasn't just a car, it was the soundtrack of a new culture. And it mattered who the GTO went up against. Ford's Mustang, released in 1964, was a phenomenon, but in its first year, it was more about style than raw power. Beautiful, affordable, incredibly popular, but still a youth car, not a street brawler. The Chevelle was just beginning its evolution into a true muscle car. Oldsmobile 442, Buick GS, they were still searching for identity. Against this backdrop, the GTO looked brutally honest and straightforward. No subtle philosophy, no complicated positioning, just a mid-sized body with a big, angry motor and one simple message: it's fast. That's why young people made it their own so quickly. At street races, the GTO became the unofficial favorite. Stories spread about guys who cleaned out rivals at the quarter mile, or about a kid from another neighborhood who got himself a new GTO and now everyone wanted to challenge him. The car from magazine covers quickly became the hero of nighttime parking lots. People didn't buy it to show off at the office. They bought it to roll up to gas stations at night, see familiar faces, and listen to their exhaust echo under the streetlights. So in just a few years, the GTO rooted itself in several layers of culture at once. In dealerships, it was sold as a bold, slightly rebellious choice. In magazines, it was described as a machine that broke GM's internal rules. And on the streets, it was seen as a tool. If you wanted to be first off the line, if you wanted your engine to be heard long before your car appeared, the GTO was one of the best options out there. And that combination, a daring engineering trick, honest power, and the living street reputation, turned the first GTO into more than just a success. It became the starting point of the entire muscle car era. But credit must be given to DeLorean. Without him, none of this would have happened. He was that rare type of engineer who understood machinery, the market, and people equally well. At Pontiac, he quickly became impossible to ignore. Tall, charismatic, with a movie star aura and the mind of someone who always thought ahead. His ideas often seem too bold, too risky, too rebellious, but people like that are the ones who move industries forward. In the early 60s, DeLorean could feel automotive culture shifting. He went to street races, talked to young drivers, listened to their conversations around cars. To most GM executives, this was noise, something small, temporary, unimportant. But DeLorean sensed a new generation being born. A generation that didn't care about prestige or chrome. They wanted emotion, speed, brute force. The things GM was afraid to build. He understood Pontiac couldn't stay the brand for adults. And while GM leadership chose caution, DeLorean chose risk. He could rally engineers to stay in the shop late into the night, and then, with his signature charisma, push a bold idea through upper management in the morning. But his true genius wasn't just technical, it was strategic. Where others saw rules, he saw loopholes. Where others read prohibited, he saw not specified. That's why the idea of the GTO as an option package was possible at all. Formally, it didn't break GM rules, but practically, Pontiac got exactly what GM forbade: a mid-sized car with a huge, full-blooded V8. And it's important to understand something. DeLorean didn't just risk his career, he risked his standing inside the corporation. GM didn't like rule breakers. GM liked order, reports, predictability. DeLorean was the opposite, the kind of man who could walk into an executive's office, drop a stack of sales charts onto the desk, and say, "We can be number one if you don't get in the way." Some found him impossible, others found him inspiring. But under his leadership, Pontiac shook off the dust of being the old man's brand for the first time in decades. When the GTO became a hit, DeLorean wasn't surprised. What surprised him was the speed. He predicted growth, but not that Pontiac would become a cultural icon almost instantly. And he understood something deeper. He wasn't building a car, he was building a movement. The GTO wasn't numbers, it wasn't marketing, it was the feeling of a generation GM had ignored for too long. DeLorean later left the company, built his own car, and ended up in a scandal that made his name legendary for a completely different reason. But in the mid-60s, he was the man who changed Pontiac, GM, and American car culture with a single decision. And without his boldness, stubbornness, and almost reckless faith in his idea, the GTO of 1964 might never have existed at all. When the GTO hit the market, Pontiac reached its moment of truth. No flashy presentations, no magazine features, no arguments from DeLorean mattered anymore. The only thing that counted was sales. And the numbers showed something no one expected, not even the boldest optimists. By the end of 1964, while the car was only beginning to gain traction, dealers were desperately demanding more units. The plan was 5,000 cars a year, a number GM leadership saw as the absolute ceiling. But reality shattered every forecast. The very first model year closed with more than 32,000 cars sold. And that meant only one thing. People were ready to pay for power, for sound, for emotion, for that very kick under the foot that the 389 V8 delivered. Pontiac realized it had created not just a successful product, but a phenomenon, and 1965 became the year that secured the success officially. Improvements in styling, a more aggressive front end, the stronger tri-power setup, all of it made the GTO even more desirable. Sales skyrocketed to 75,000 units, an unthinkable figure for a model that had been nothing more than an experimental option just a year earlier. By 1966 and 1967, demand remained consistently high. In those years, the GTO fully transformed into a symbol of Pontiac itself. No longer just DeLorean's bold idea, but a true legend of American roads. But with popularity come legends, and myths began to grow around the GTO, each living its own life. One of the most common myths claimed Ferrari tried to sue Pontiac for using the GTO name. On parking lots, people love telling the story. You know, Ferrari wanted to take the name back? In reality, nothing like that happened. Ferrari, of course, knew about the American GTO, but made no legal claims. Enzo understood perfectly well that these cars lived in completely different worlds. Another myth revolved around horsepower. Many owners insisted the Tri-Power 389 made far more power than Pontiac claimed. And honestly, that myth had more truth in it than the Enzo story. Pontiac did tend to underrate its engines, and they weren't alone. In an era when insurance companies were beginning to pay attention to horsepower ratings, manufacturers often played with numbers, lowering them to avoid scaring off buyers with higher premiums. That's why real GTOs often rank quicker than journalists expected. And there was one more myth, the most alive, the most real. The myth that the GTO was a car that could win a street race out of the box, without tuning, without upgrades, simply because Pontiac built it that way. And this legend wasn't far from the truth. Back then, stories circulated about guys who'd go to the dealership, pick up their brand new GTO, bolt on the license plates, and the same evening hit the street races and win. Not every race, not against every rival, but often enough that the GTO earned a reputation as the car that isn't afraid of a stoplight. And so, through sales, through myths, through late-night stories, the GTO quietly became more than just a car. It became an idea, a symbol of boldness, a reminder that even inside a giant corporation, daring decisions can still be born, if there's someone like DeLorean, someone willing to risk everything for what he believes in. And when you look at this entire journey, from bypassing GM's rulebook to tens of thousands of cars sold, you realize the GTO didn't just start the muscle car era. It was the spark that forced the entire American auto industry to stop pretending to be cautious. In the 1960s, American car culture was on the edge of an explosion, and the GTO became the match that lit the fuse. Pontiac is long gone now. The factories where the first GTOs were built no longer echo with engines and tools. But start up one of those old 389s, hear that familiar heavy thump thump thump, and you instantly understand why this car became a legend. The GTO doesn't need to defend its name, it's already carved into history. It was the first, it was bold, it was the car that proved one simple truth. Sometimes all it takes is one fearless idea to change an entire era.